Hello, and welcome to this inaugural conference of MinervaDB Athena 2020. Uh, Very glad to be talking to all of you. My name is Roy. I am from Sequoia Capital, and I'm going to talk to you folks a little bit about sort of the role of venture capital in the establishing and building and operating of database infrastructure companies. And before I begin, just sort of a brief intro about myself. I have been at Sequoia Capital now for about 8 years. I'm attached to the India and Southeast Asia Fund, and before that, I was at Zynga, where I basically ran the Z Cloud engineering team. One of the big things that we did there was we actually essentially built and operated our own sort of NoSQL database infrastructure, which we had sort of worked with CouchDB back when it was Membase, and then sort of forked that and built our own as we tried to evolve to a higher transaction system. And so we ran what was at the time one of the world's largest database clusters, and I think that gives us, at least gives me, a little bit of perspective on what it takes to build companies like this. Since leaving Zynga, I've been at Sequoia Capital. It's almost 8 years now, and my focus over the last 8 years has been to sort of do a lot of the early stage investing in various different kinds of AI and infra and DB infra companies. And when I spent time with Shiv and we discussed this, it became sort of clear that a lot of folks in this sort of area of software development aren't always certain how venture capital can help. And so, what Shiv and I were discussing this, and we thought it might be interesting to just have a quick call, not call, but have this talk to just give you folks a little bit of perspective on what venture capital can do, what Sequoia Capital does, and whether this is the right product or the right service for you is something for you to sort of think about as you are sort of building your companies, right? So a little bit of Sequoia Capital, I think fairly well known. Hopefully you've had a chance to intersect with some of our portfolio companies. But we've been around 40 plus years. A very significant number of our companies have gone on to build very enduring brands and occupy very central positions in both infrastructure and consumer minds. Recently, one of our investments, Snowflake, went public, and that's been one of the more interesting enterprise tech DB infra companies that we've invested in recently. But we've also been sort of investing in and around this whole area, including Kafka, which is built by Confluent, which is another portfolio company of ours, and things of that nature. In Southeast Asia and India as well, we've been investing a fair amount in companies like this. So in the last 12 months, we invested in a company called Athena, which is building essentially the Informatica of the cloud world. So as you move your data off your on-prem infra onto the cloud, then you want to move your catalogs and your governance structures as well. And Athena is allows you to do that. Similarly, we invested in a company called Last9 that's very focused on site reliability engineering. And while they're not DB focused, they're much more general purpose SRE. One of the big sort of features of their product, which I think is very interesting for folks who build DB infra, is that they actually operationalize and provide a time series database and essentially a time shifted view of infrastructure that people are building. And that's a very interesting sort of ability for folks to visualize not just what their infra looked like, but what it used to, and what certain changes will do to it. And that's another interesting way for them to, make sure that they aren't, having the sorts of errors that lead to massive outages, right? And so that's sort of the interesting, ability of that company. But just to give you a sense of the kinds of companies that we're interested in, we talk to, and of course, if you're building something similar, we'd love to talk to you. In terms of venture capital itself, for the folks who aren't sort of very sort of clear about what that is, it's essentially a form of equity financing. And what we do is, we are investors, which means that we will infuse capital into your company if we think the thesis is interesting and we can build a very large company, and we like the founders. And also as part of that, you get a lot of access to company building, and one of the most important sort of things about that is the ability to, depending again on the stage, it is the ability to sort of find the right kinds of customers, early thought leader type CTOs, folks who are running hyperscale, massive growth startups, who tend to be the hungriest for new technology and very hungry to sort of work with early stage folks who are building new kinds of infra. And that's really sort of one of the big advantages of sort of working with the folks in the venture capital world, is the ability to sort of spread into that part of what we can provide. Yeah, but in order to sort of put a bit more of a sort of formal structure on this, the way to think about this is that there are essentially and so as I was saying, the way to think about this is that there are essentially, three different kinds of capital raises, and and it's a function of sort of the stage of company that you're in, and the kind of product that you're building, and what the primary use of the capital is, right? And so, the way this is organized is that you might be very early, just thinking about what you can build, or you've just started building something and you have a certain amount of traction, but want to sort of now take it out and establish whether what you've built has real product market fit. And that's usually targeted, and that's usually when you're looking to raise seed capital, right? Which is early capital, which comes with the sort of company building help that I was talking about, which is, the ability to connect with customers and CTOs and, high profile angels who can help you not just think through what you're building, but also help you get the word out in what is an increasingly crowded marketplace of ideas. Folks like that and folks in the portfolio can help you not just fine tune, but also amplify your message so that it reaches the right people. And that's a very important part of sort of what happens, as part of the seed investing that we do. The second stage is venture, right? And this is when you have a clear sort of product market fit, your product's working, folks are using it, and now you want to sort of start to scale it up, and you want to establish that there is a repeatable sales process and a repeatable sort of process by which you can market the product, sell it, folks can use it and derive value from it. The third stage is another interesting stage, which is the growth stage, which is you establish PMF, you raise some venture money, you've established your engines both in the sales and customer support and marketing side of things, and now that everything's sort of working and you have not just happy customers, but your customers are telling other folks about you and things of that nature, it might be now time to sort of try to see how large this can grow, right? And at least what we've seen in the recent past is that, in companies like Snowflake, et cetera, which is that once you've sort of crossed that venture stage, then, you can grow. Not only can you grow very rapidly, but the markets are so much bigger than they ever have been, with so many more companies, eager to sort of consume all the, sort of the modern infra that's being built, right? And so the third stage is the growth stage, right? Where, you typically would look to raise a much larger sum of money. And along with that, you get a different kind of sort of company building help. Depending on sort of how close you are to IPO, there are sort of, there's all of that. Or if it's earlier, then, just building the financial engine and this, and helping scale up the sales and customer support engines to get you to that point. So that's really the, what's interesting about the three different kinds of raises. And it often helps to know what exactly you're looking for, right? And so then that's something for you to think through as you are sort of coming in and looking for sort of venture capital. Want to talk a little bit about a new program that we launched about a couple of years ago, and both the companies I talked about, which is Last Line and Atlin, are sort of members of that program. And that program is an early stage program called Surge. And the focus of Surge was very simple. We wanted to basically take a set of exceptional founders who we think are building incredibly interesting large companies of the future, and sort of bring them together and try to distill a very large part of our company building and tribal knowledge around what it takes to not just occupy pole position, but stay there for very long. Try to distill that into a program that we can then have these founders go through and learn not just from the program, but also with each other. One of the interesting things that has emerged from Surge, as we, which is a diversified program. There are consumer, tech-enabled businesses. There are, social networking, front-end technology businesses. There are, essentially lots of B2C businesses. But we've also, sort of been investing in B2B companies, and essentially now beginning to invest in the infra and developer tool companies as part of Surge, because what we've seen is that there's actually a lot of benefit for those companies to be a part of a program like this, because they can see firsthand how their customers, their customer base, as they are coming up and growing, the kinds of decisions they make, some are good, some are bad, the kind of thought process that they have, and how they think about buying and consuming software, especially database infra and SRE and DevOps software. And this has been very, very interesting and a very big company building sort of capability that we are providing some of our DB infra companies, because they find it very valuable to sort of be in the cauldron, as we speak, and see how these sort of companies emerge. It really helps them fine-tune their message, as well as fine-tune their ability to sort of talk the language of their customers and help them sort of understand what they can do. So that's about Surge, and I thought we sort of just bring that to your attention. That's a program that runs twice a year, but you can apply whenever you like, and we typically process most applications in a 2 to 3 week time frame, and there's no limit to the number of times you can apply. And of course, we'd encourage you to sort of provide as much information as you can to help us sort of determine whether we think that Surge is right for you. But if you're building a company and if this is of interest, I would encourage you to think about applying. So switching gears a little bit, and we talked about this in Surge, of course, but what is the broader sort of aspect of company building, right, that venture capital provides, right? And this is, I think, something that at least folks in the consumer and B2B side of things, folks who are building more application level software, I think they understand this a lot better. But in infra, it tends to be a little less evident, because infrastructure companies, have a fundamentally different kind of a hockey stick of growth. And a lot of the focus, at least in the beginning, is on establishing value, establishing, a central part of, trying to basically occupy a part of the stack, so that as the canonical sort of systems diagrams get drawn for that area, whether it be the database stack, whether it be, your OLAP architectures or your OLTP architectures, then once you can occupy part of that stack, after that, it becomes a scaling / growth problem. But just getting to that point is hard and takes, significantly longer than a consumer property, which, if it is able to, sort of catch people's attention, can essentially grow much faster in a much sort of, quicker area of their lives. But a database company or a DB SRE company will take its time sort of to get there. So for that, I think, there are two things that are important. It's important to sort of work with somebody who's patient capital. People who don't understand the space and who might compare you to a very different kind of business can get not just antsy, but perhaps impatient about sort of your growth. And so you definitely want to work with folks who understand what building a company in your space looks and feels like, and has the patience to sort of work with you through that. But also there are specific company building sort of activities, right? Which are common, in a sense between B2B and infra companies, right? Which is, the first biggest question is, what is going to be your distribution strategy, right? Are you a, open source developers will find and, use you, and that's how you go to market? Are you going to be a top-down sale because of, again, depending on your criticality as part of the stack, the decision about using a product like yours may not be something that individual developers can make. And in that situation, you're going to have to sort of work with them in a more top-down fashion in order to sort of get the right kind of buy-in from, maybe the CTO or, head of DevOps or what have you, right? And so just understanding what the distribution strategy is I think is one of the first sort of big things that having someone with a VC background who's seen a lot of different companies can be very helpful in debating some of those choices. The second aspect of company building that's really important to think through is how are you going to go to market, right? So you figure out how you're going to distribute, you figure out who's going to buy it, why they're going to buy it. But then there's still the matter of sort of, thinking through, how are you going to build a lead funnel? How are you, going to make sure that the folks know about you at the time at which they're making decisions like this? You need to be sort of front and center. And so how do you sort of make sure that that's happening? And then how do you make sure that you've built the right teams and have the right kind of pricing structure so that, people can buy you at the same time it's relatively sort of profitable over a longer term to sort of operate the kind of distribution strategy that you're applying, right? And so that's again a part of the company building sort of architecture that folks who come from a technology and product background, while they can definitely reason that from first principles, and that's often very exciting for them, it's still something that having some folks with experience around the table is often very helpful. And so that's the broader point I just want to make as part of this, which is that when you think about VC, it's not just capital. Though of course that's an important part of it. It helps you hire, etc. But it's also the company building, sort of work that we can do with you, which I think is, something that you should consider when you are sort of, thinking about whether VC is right for you or not. And there are folks around, like folks at, even Shiv and Minerva, for example, we worked with him a fair bit, and some other companies who can attest to, what this company building is like. And so I would urge you to sort of think about it and, ask folks and, try to get some perspective on whether, having the venture capital company building type advice is useful for you or not, right? So anyway, that's the long and short of it in terms of, who we are and what we do and, what capital is and what company building is and what surge is and all of that. I want to talk a little bit about, some areas that we find interesting and especially going forward, right? And I think, and this is just to sort of, for the folks who are maybe on the fence about starting a company, this might be something that's interesting for you to just, noodle on a little bit and things for you to think through, right? So, I think that, we've seen a lot of work on the OLAP side, right? And, the emergence of the new sort of modern data stack, with Snowflake and dbt and, all of these other really interesting sort of technologies that are coming up. But we haven't seen, nearly enough, at least in my view, work on the OLTP side, right? And so, folks who are, thinking about that and building new and interesting, transactional data storage methods, we'd love to sort of, we'd love to talk to folks like that. And, if that's something that you're interested in, we'd love to sort of jam with you on, what some potential architectures are and what some potentially interesting ideas in that space could be. I think the whole rise of the NoSQL movement, we were investors in MongoDB, and that's, that sort of drove that a little bit. Has been very interesting, but, as we all know, there's no one solution that fits, every problem statement. And while NoSQL is very good for some things, there's lots of use cases for which that is not the right architecture, but we see people try to force fit that anyways for lack of options, right? And I think in that lack of options, I think is an opportunity to build new kinds of OLTP companies. And so if that's something that you're interested in and, want to chat about, please do reach out, and we'd love to, like I said, have a chat about that. The other sort of very interesting areas, of course, as databases get more and more central to, data storage and the operation of all of these companies, and now that pretty much everything is online, the ability to run and operate and maintain your DB is more and more important. And of course, this is driving a lot of the databases as a service type products. Atlas inside MongoDB is an example of something that's growing very rapidly. But even the managed Postgres solutions of AWS and Azure and others are getting a lot of traction of this. But there's still a fair number of people, as we know, who would like to run their own DB clusters and run their own DB. And the tooling, especially in the SRE and adoption and migration side, I think still has a lot of opportunity for us to think about building, new kinds of companies and new kinds of products. So that's another area I think that we're sort of very excited about. The next thesis part, which again, at least I personally am incredibly excited about, and I keep talking to Shiv about this one, is the whole concept of the data fabric, right? Which is, when you think about how complicated DB setups are today in terms of, how do you think about, there's an OLTP versus OLAP difference, but then, how do you think about backup and archival, and, when should you run your masters and slaves, and all of those interesting problems are exciting and hard to solve for. But there's lots and lots of businesses that we see that start today, that grow very rapidly to a very massive size, that do not have necessarily the sort of ability to think about how to solve these problems, but I think would be very eager consumers of a data fabric product. And the data fabric product in many ways is the holy grail of all of these DB infras, which is a single API to consume them all, with all of the sort of OLTP, OLAP separations and ELTs and all of that stuff happening just under the surface, completely abstracted from these operators, and making all of their decisions, using smarter pattern matching and dare I say ML, but not requiring folks to come in and fine tune it. Now, this of course does not work at scale, right? We know that, but I think there is a really interesting solution space for small and medium businesses who still who, despite their size, still need the ability to operate on all of this data in all of these different ways, and building sort of a single data fabric product for them, I think is a very, very interesting area, very ripe for innovation. So again, if this is something that you're thinking about or interested in, please holler. We'd love to discuss it. There is of course something that's a sort of a generational shift, right? The migration of of data off things like Oracle onto newer DB architectures, and folks who can enable this migration. I think there's still very interesting tooling and very interesting tool companies that can sort of be built in this space. Very exciting, again, simply because of how large this market is, and there's lots of different places where the current architectures are beginning to seem a little creaky, and new solutions I think have a real shot of adding a lot of value. And so that's another interesting, I think, thesis area. We talked a little bit about some of the investments in Surge, but Surge is we're very interested, like I said, in investing in DB infra and database technology companies. And while some of the ideas and theses I threw out are interesting, by no means are we limited just to that. We'd be happy to talk to anybody who's building anything interesting to see if we can work together. So of course you can find me on the internet, my email address and all of that. But of course, I'm also on Twitter at SMD CMC. And if you'd like to discuss, please connect with me there, and we'd love to sort of start a conversation. Thank you so much for your time, folks. Thank you for patiently listening to me. And if you have any questions about what I talked about, obviously I touched on a lot of things, but at a fairly high level. But if you'd like to get in deep with any of this stuff, please do reach out. I'd love to have a longer coffee chat and talk to you a lot more about some of the stuff that we're doing here at Sequoia, at Surge, and help you think through whether Surge is the right product for you. Thank you so much for your time. Please do enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.
All right, Roy. Thank you so much for submitting your talk and being a diamond sponsor for MinervaDB Athena 2020. Good to see you here, man. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Shiv. Always look forward to meeting hardcore database people. Is some of my favorite people in this planet. So absolutely looking forward to this.
Pleasure, man. Pleasure. So your talk is quite interesting for all of us in the conference committee and the audience. I tell you why, right? How the venture capital companies have shaped up some of the largest pure tech, especially database systems companies, from the early stage to a phase of unicorn or even beyond. Can you share with us the story that how a venture capital company can be hands-on in building a database systems company?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shiv, and we get that a lot when we speak to some of the more sort of early tech database companies. Traditionally, because of what is perceived as a long gestation cycle, folks who build database systems or try to work at that level of infrastructure often feel that venture capital, because of what they perceive as a short-term nature, is not well suited for them. And one of the things I want to talk about is how that is actually very far from the truth. The reality is that, especially in today's world, having the ability to have folks around the table who can not just provide capital, which is in many ways, just the baseline service that venture capital provides, but it's really strategy, it's company building, it's early customer acquisition. It's the ability to navigate this space between all of these different business models, right? Are you going to be developer tools, or are you going to be bottoms up adoption? Are you going to follow a big enterprise lighthouse customer strategy? A lot of that will basically determine how you should go to market. And having someone around the table who can help you brainstorm some of these and figure out what's right for you, I think is a very big thing. And so, my advice to all the bootstrap companies out there is that don't think of this just as, hey, fast capital, hungry for a return. Think of it as someone who can help me strategize how to build the largest, most impactful company that I can, which is what I'm assuming is a lot of folks want to do that. And that's one of the big reasons why working with VC is often helpful.
Wonderful. How do you see the differentiation when you are working as an investor on a consumer-facing internet economy business against a pure tech company? Like, if you look at the differentiator is quite visible for everybody, right? When you're looking at a very much on a bigger internet company, major part of your capital will be deployed on infrastructure, advertisement, and several other operational logistical requirements. How do you see that working on an open source company, open source deep tech company? How do you see that differentiator working? What is the capital requirement on both of these companies? How do you see the differentiator?
Yeah, I mean, see, honestly, I think every company has to play the game that they've chosen to play, right? And if you are a B2C business, your job is to acquire users, demonstrate product market fit, show that you can scale profitably. A lot of folks get distracted again by the fact that these companies seem to burn a lot of cash. But it is often a strategic choice because of the nature of the sort of the business and the value that it can generate if it is massive, right? An infra player is fundamentally different market, and so you can often build a deep tech infra business in a much more capital efficient but fundamentally slower, man, right? Like you can't, a good deep tech business shouldn't try to grow 20, 25x a year, at least not a year, right? There is, there comes a time when it's easy to do that. But, if you look at Datadog, if you look at Red Hat, these are companies that sort of compound very nicely over a long period of time without ever having a dramatically massive year. And so, and so that's the big difference, right? And so the capital requirements are different, the strategy is different. The big value prop for deep tech companies that VC provides is network. A lot of the big customers who are willing to try bleeding edge technology are often these consumer stuff. And this is something that we've seen even in the Minerva context, right? That the most, these B2C companies are great customers. And who knows all the all the big B2C companies? It's the VCs, right? And so, that's another angle that I think if you're doing a deep tech company is worth pursuing.
So can I call technically a company like Sequoia Capital, which is known as a venture capital, as a venture partner for a companies like MinervaDB or anyone who is in open source software ecosystem?
No, absolutely. I think we've partnered with a lot of open source companies in the past. We are, I think we understand the free software revolution quite well. If you look at sort of the investing history over the past, few decades, I think it stands up to that. And especially in the data world, I think, with our investments in Snowflake, Confluent, which builds Kafka, MongoDB, we have lots of different open source investments, and we continue to make a lot more of them going forward. So open source absolutely fits our gambit. Questions that we will ask you are generally the same, right? Which is, if this succeeds, how big can this become? How big is the market? Why is now the right time to build a company like this? And why are you the right people to build a company like this? I think those are, sure, the questions can get different flavors, but it broadly boils down to these few questions, and the answers to them will determine whether or not you are sort of a viable VC fit. I think the other point I want to make, which is I think important for folks to understand, is that VC is only one sliver of the overall sort of financial universe, right? And so there are some very nice companies, very big companies that get built that are actually not good fits for VC, and that's okay. And you should just think of it as a service provider in many ways, which is, is this the right service provider for my needs? Will it help me build the kind of company I want to build? If what you're interested in is a lifestyle business with high impact, then maybe VC is not the best idea for you. But if you want to build something that's big, that has very massive impact, then VC is probably a good idea for you.
So from a context of an open source company, right? The complete development goals are community based, right? Purely technology accelerated, driven, and suddenly we see a venture capital company. So do you have something like top 3 points like an open source company should have in books from day one when they want to talk to a venture capital?
Yeah, I think open source is practically required for certain markets, and so you should have a very clear strategy in your head for why you are doing open source. We also run into a lot of open source projects where the only people who work on the project are people who work at the company, and so while they are open source, there's no real community and there's no real sort of external development help in those companies. Those tend to be less interesting, right? Unless there is a different angle to it. But generally speaking, if you are open source because you want community involvement and help, then you should demonstrate that you have the ability to work as a community and you've taken some pain to nurture a community. I think the other thing that's sort of important is, even if it's not immediate, is to have some answer about how value is going to be captured in the economic sense, right? Which is, very large businesses and very interesting companies will use your tech, and that's great. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, how will you monetize some part of that is an important question to answer as well, right? And and while I think that open source principles of being sort of very reasonable, being fair, being open, and not trying to screw your customer are tremendous principles, right? At the end of the day, for anything to be long lasting and impactful, it is useful for it to have some idea about what a monetization engine looks like. And that does not have to come from I'm going to keep the source code close to my chest, and that's why you will pay me. That model is, it's antiquated, and the newer models of building very nice open source businesses is already here, right? We've seen that with Red Hat, we've seen that with other companies, right? And so I think that's the other sort of piece of advice, right? Which is absolutely think about how you will sort of create a strong monetization engine for yourself. Even if it's way in the future, that's okay. It can be way in the future, and that's fine. But you should have an idea on what that's going to look like eventually.
So what are the phases typically an open source company will contact Sequoia? I mean, I read often about there is something called Sequoia Surge program, and then I see Sequoia, getting bigger, deeper, high impact investments. Do you mind in sharing with us like how from a bootstrap who enters Surge to graduate? What are the criteria for an open source company you look at, right? It's quite different, right? For example, if I'm coming as an open source company to you, I may say like, hey, something, I have 500,000 downloads of my repositories from GitHub. Doesn't that mean as a direct commercial contract involved? But then, yeah, those are the ones which turns out to be our support contracts. Even could be less than one person sometimes. So what do you see that, what are the stages which typically an open source company can come and talk to you, and from there, how?
So firstly, I think never too early to talk to Sequoia. We've, some of our deep tech infra investments have been made of, straight up sort of, Emacs documents. They haven't even been, we haven't even started writing the first line of code. But we were convinced about the space and the area in which those founders were going to sort of try to build a company. And so Surge is our early stage program. And, one of the focus areas for Surge is early stage deep tech computer infra type company. And so, in every Surge batch, we have at least one or two of them that are building interesting products, be it in SRE, be it in, data analytics, be it in, machine learning, model management. In all of these different areas, we've done early stage investments. The typical way most venture capital firms are organized, and we're organized similarly, is that there's early stage Surge, there's our venture team, and then there's the growth team. And at each stage, the bar is right. And so, understanding what the product is an important part of sort of, asking to work with that team, right? And so, if you're early, you have what you think is product market fit, and you have very clear signs that very interesting folks are building on top of you. That's a great fit for Surge. And and sometimes even if you haven't reached there yet, but you have something that you think is interesting, still a good fit for Surge, and you should definitely try to talk to us. If you already have some level of product market fit, if you feel like there is there's traction, there's very clear growth, and now what you need is ability to sort of go out and build a real team around this strong technology project, that's a good fit for the venture team. And if you're already off to the races and you've built a large company and you've got lots of sort of downloads, etc., and now you want to basically grow it, and so there's very little technology risk left. It's really now just about growth. Then it's good for the growth team, right? And our hope is that you will work with us early. We do our best work early with most companies. So we try to get involved, just like we did at Minerva, it's very early stage, right? And so that's how we want to do it.
Thank you, Roy. So thanks for giving us absolute clarity, a lot of knowledge for us, definitely. Also equally exciting, right? This gives us a clear picture about, a venture capital can be a venture partner, so as a growth enabler for a company from an early stage to beyond. Thanks again for being our diamond sponsor for the event. Looking forward to talking to you again. Thanks, Rai.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Shiv. Like I said, some of my favorite people on this planet. I look forward to having conversations. I hope this inspires some of you to reach out and have a conversation about, whether you'd like to sort of work with us. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.